Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, spending your latest royalty advance on a Bored Ape Yacht Club NFT, or else a scrappy upstart, screenshotting that same Bored Ape for your profile picture, this is your show. Because ultimately, it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the first Friday of June 2022, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Philly who drove a Dodge Charger with a vanity license plate from South Carolina that seemed to just be the shortened spelling for the word murderer. And old Philly would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music and merch commission-free. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, the first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm over on my YouTube channel for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream. I'm live. I'm playing tunes live. I'm taking questions in the live chat. I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I dare to say that we're building something of a community over there, including many people who are listeners to this podcast. So come on over and be a part of it. That's the first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern over on YouTube. Head on over to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab to set a reminder. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription. A subscription that you certainly don't have to pay for, but that you just choose to pay for because you dig the show and because you won't miss a few bucks at the end of every month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who's taken the time and capital to contribute in that way to the show. And if you're not in a place where you can contribute in that way, it's totally understandable. You could still help out the show in a couple ways that are entirely free. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store, or second, you could simply tell a friend about the show. Spread the word about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Thanks for being here this week. I really, really hope that you enjoy my conversation with Dar Williams. Our guest this week has been at the vanguard of American folk music for the last 25 years. Dar Williams rose out of the vibrant mid-90s Boston scene, inspired by the eclectic influences of alt-rockers, Berkeley jazz musicians, slam poets, and folk artists like Patti Griffith. After a year of touring nonstop with her first album, The Honesty Room, in 1994, she was invited by Joan Baez to tour in Europe and the United States. She's recorded for Razor and Tie and Waterbug Records. She's also the author of What I Found in 1,000 Towns, a traveling musician's guide to rebuilding America's communities, one coffee shop, dog run, and open mic night at a time. The New York Times once described a sold-out concert of hers at Town Hall as graceful and flirting with the edge. NPR says that she writes and sings songs that have been admired for years about navigating loss, love, and heartbreak. Rolling Stone has lauded her wry sense of humor and knack for narratives. I got a chance to catch up with her on the phone earlier this week to hear about her journey so far. Dar Williams, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. You hail from New York State originally, I believe, and I believe you still make your home there now. What did music look like in your household growing up?
There was WPLJ, WQXR, we had a lot of, top 40, and then sort of FM, 70s FM, Led Zeppelin on the radio. And but my parents, and then my dad would listen to QXR, which was the classical station, and he'd work down in his workshop, and we'd hear him singing along with opera from the basement, sort of coming up through the pipes, which was very sweet. And they had this record collection that was alphabetized, and on the left of the black and white TV were all of the classical records, and on the right of the TV were the everything else. And so we had a lot of B through D, Beatles, Byrds, Judy Collins, Joan Baez. It was a lot of Crosby, Stills and Nash, Jim Croce, who I'm so happy. I keep on hearing him coming out of the speakers in places, and a lot of other songwriters. And then Simon and Garfunkel kind of farther down, all that. There would be with Mamas and the Papas. Lots of harmony music was in our house. We sang harmony. My sister played guitar. We liked to do that together. And we loved to sing all of the, traditional and contemporary folk songs. But that's kind of the time we were in. It's not just because, there are families now who do that. I'm like, how do you pull that off? But back in the day, that was what we were steeped in. And also Broadway musicals. I had insomnia from an early age, and I would choreograph Broadway production numbers like in my parents' living room at night. That was my thing.
And mom and dad are like, as long as you're not bothering us, you can go ahead and do that. As long as we can sleep. Right.
Exactly.
Now, where do you think that influence came from with your folks? Your dad listening to opera in the workshop. Like, I don't think that's a very common thing. And then also having a whole section of the record collection that was classical music. Like, where did that passion come from for your folks?
I don't know where that came from, but it was my dad really loves classical music, and there's, my parents were really cheap, which is, great. I always thought that my parents actually had a lot of money, but that they were really cheap, but they actually didn't have a lot of money. But I remember he brought home a Bang & Olufsen, boombox, basically. And I was, in my teens. I think he still has the same one. And he would bring it out to the garden, and he would bring it out to, to the wood shop. And so he was, I think that there was a kind of a, he went to private schools, and I think he was sort of part of this group of people for whom it wasn't quite a match, and so, to be refined, you listen to this kind of music, and you made things with wood, and you were into gardening, but then you also belonged to a country club and had a pool and had a huge paying job and all that stuff. And I think he kind of kept that kind of Renaissance man woodworking. He was an editor, so, he had a job, but it wasn't just to make money. I mean, he really loved it. And so he kind of had a gentle Renaissance feel to his whole life. He's still with us, and he still does. He's the town historian. He gets Volunteer of the Year awards with my mom a lot. So I think the classical music was that, part of being sort of a gentleman, and a sort of a breeding thing. But he held on to that, but not the snobbery that goes with it.
Right.
And the 60s were perfect for him. I remember he sat me down to listen to the Bee Gees song, Have You Seen My Wife, Mr. Jones? And he just started to cry. And he played The Times They Are Changing, and he started to cry about being at the Democratic Convention and hearing this song. And I always assumed that it was Bob Dylan singing it, but it was just the Westchester Convention Center and some guy singing it. But he loved the intersection of music, culture, and politics.
Did any of that musical sense of the classical and the opera, did any of that get through to you? Do you notice as an adult working artist now, some of it bubbling up in your work, or did it kind of pass you by?
My sense of melody, I think, comes a lot from sort of 19th century classical music. And that's probably, and also opera. I worked at an opera company after college, and it was wild. I mean, if I do a screenplay, it's going to be called, Sex, Drugs, and Opera. And it was just, people having affairs in makeup, in the wings. But it was also a really great way to see. I've written this book about songwriting, and something I reference is seeing the Madame Butterfly production and recognizing that there's this ancestor chorus in the first act where it's sort of, and it kind of comes welling up around Madame Butterfly as she's getting married. It's sort of the affirmation of the ancestors, and they're all sort of singing along, and they're all sort of lined up in formation. And at the end of the opera, she's been left, and she has her child, and so she's completely been shamed, and you see her sort of in this moment of recognition, and that same ancestor chorus theme comes up, and it underscores her shame. It underscores the gravity of the situation. And, folk music can do the same. So, in the same chapter, I juxtapose that with a Bill Morrissey song, where he says something in the first verse that seems kind of light, and then later on you realize, he talks about the beauty of the night and the stillness and everyone's asleep, and later on you realize that there's a crime being committed, and that the night is actually this wonderful, gentle backdrop that lets you do things illegally, it's brilliant. So I think I learned a lot about the power of musical and narrative themes that can repeat in different ways in, sort of the power of music itself, narratively.
I think that's a brilliant thought, because I've heard many times before people reference with folk music the idea that, ancestry or a lineage can come through in artistic moments that are very affirmative, very positive. We feel like we're a part of the river of history when we do something good. But what's very interesting about your point there is that also, to your point about the Madame Butterfly play, is that also in our lowest moments, artistically or personally, that same sort of lineage, that same sort of history kind of arrives there as well to act as a judge, almost.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And things that, yes, and they come back to haunt us, and that's specifically, or Tracy Chapman's Fast Car. It took me a while to understand that, she said, we got a fast car, we're going to go really fast, we're going to do this, we're going to get away from my parents. And that same spirit of rebellion and not being conventional comes up at the end, where basically, the fast car represents the fact that her partner is flighty and is going to leave her in the lurch as well. And so when she says at the end, remember when we were driving in your car going so fast, I feel like I'm flying. It haunts her,
Yes.
And that's a wonderful thing that you can do in a very short song.
I'm so glad you brought up that song. It's like, that is somehow one of my favorite top 10 songs of all time. And What's really interesting to hear you talk about it there, you're talking about how she uses the metaphor for the fast car. You know, you have this flighty partner that eventually leaves you, even though you had all this beautiful manic energy together. But something I'm realizing now, as you're talking about that, is they had the fast car to get away from tradition and to run away from it. But then what happens in the middle of the song? It's like, well, you know, somebody gets pregnant and now it's like, well, I'm going to work a job and we're going to make they run back into the arms of tradition in the middle of the song.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you know, the thing that they arguably didn't have a choice insofar as maybe they were getting away from something that would have trapped them in one way, and then, you know, reality traps them in another way. And yeah, and as we're saying, it revisits them. That you know, their hubris revisits them,
yes,
and kind of plants them in the ground differently by the end of the song, with that same feeling of, you know, she still wants the fast car. You know, she's still, the
yes.
memory is still with her, and now she's juxtaposing it with her own reality. Yeah, it. And how long is that song? You know, 3 minutes and 25 seconds.
Yes.
So that's you know, that's something that we can aspire to.
It does kind of get at this point in just those 3.5 minutes that there is this naive thought when you're younger that you can somehow exist outside of history, outside of culture, outside of the concrete facts of reality. I think, especially as artists, we all probably thought that we could step outside of that, and then you get a little bit older, or maybe you just listen to Tracy Chapman's song and you realize that you can't, damn it.
Oh, no, I don't think we learned that from listening to music. I think we're consoled by that music when it happens to us.
Yes, when you get kicked in the teeth by it.
Yeah.
Now, so you and I have something very much in common in that we're both musicians, but when we were younger, we both flirted with theater very seriously. I went to college for theater and dropped out and ended up doing music. Why did you go to school for theater in the first place, and what drew you out of that eventually to pursue music instead?
What drew me out was happenstance, and again, you know, it's kind of what we're talking about in terms of what we think is going to happen, then what happens. I just rolled with what happened, which is that I was very interested in playwriting, and again, sort of loved the unfolding of a narrative, and loved, you know, how something could be so real for one person and not for another, and the integrity of it. You know, not like my big thing that I said coming out of college was, I love David Mamet, but the things that I see on stage are about people who betray each other, and I am very interested in people who betray themselves. You know, and all of those people inside of us, and how they interact to, you know, how we integrate all those parts of ourselves to become an identity, and we have to keep on picking up and shedding those parts of ourselves through our environment. And I'm reading a Joanna Macy book, and she says that people are open systems, you know, so we're open to an environment and we have to interact. That's what we are. Mm-hmm. And so all of that, and also, you know, the ways that everything matters on a stage, the red ribbon that drops, then you have to pick it up, because otherwise the audience is going to start creating a story around that. You know, it's called a hyper-associative space. I was interested in that sort of symbolic terrain. All of that was still in my mind and my heart when I went to Boston, and I got a job at the Opera Company of Boston, being a stage managing intern for very little money, but a lot of work. It was awesome. They were way in debt, and, you know, very exciting. And I started taking voice lessons in the middle of that, and my voice teacher said, you know, there are these open mics all around here that you can go to. Anyway, so I was there. I was at the Opera Company. I was thinking of trying to direct opera, but you really would have to know 3 languages at least to do that, none of which I spoke. And then I wrote a play, and it was put on at a theater company, and I was just starting to go to open mics, and I just remember I just turned a one-act play into a full-length play to submit to the same to theater company. But the guy who was running the theater company was my waiter when I was with my family at a restaurant, and informed me that the theater company had closed down. And do I want an hors d'oeuvre? It was so telling. The next day, I went to a song circle, and John Svetke and Jim Infantino and Ellis Paul, I think maybe Vance Gilbert, a lot of people were there, and they were all attractive and interesting and doing their thing, and they told me about different open mics, and I think that was it. I just started going to open mics, and I didn't really look back.
You mentioned there at the start, I mean, you kind of, there's two parts to that answer. The second part was just the basic thing of, the thing I was doing before went out of damn business, and I needed something to do artistically. But I kind of want to get at, the underlying thing that you were talking about there, just the idea that you were interested in art that was more interested in characters that were betraying themselves rather than betraying one another. Where do you think that intrigue or that particular interest came for you? I think it's very common in human nature to want to externalize bad behavior, to want to externalize betrayals and things of that nature. And it's sort of the exception to the rule to want to take responsibility for those things. So where do you think that particular interest, which I think is kind of unique, why did that manifest itself in you?
It probably comes from being the youngest child of two oldest children. So, I have a lot of friends who don't believe in ghosts, and I say, because you don't have to, because the real world works for them. Mm-hmm. A lot of oldest siblings, they have their minions, they make sense of the world, they pass on that wisdom, physically in whatever way they can, and the rules work for them, and the structure works for them. And I think when you're a youngest child, you really sense the injustice, and you sense, like, I am a real environmentalist. I'm very interested. I mean, sort of unusually from an early age was interested in all of the stuff, and it wasn't just because it was the early 70s and they had a picture of a dead fish in the middle of an oil slick. I think I was always interested in, like, the other side. So people say, well, you have to wear this makeup, you have to wear this clothing. And from an early age, I was like, but what about the price of manufacturing that, and who's making it, and where did it come from, and where is it going, and look at these garbage, look at these landfills. I think that was that sort of, that impulse to see the shadow of all of that law and order that was working for people was always interesting to me, because I was the one who had to come out from under. I was more creative than scholastic. I was I did fine, but I was definitely the kid who'd rather do the creative writing project than the non-creative. It's like, that's a no-brainer, right? So I was seen as a little weird, and my friends, I looked exactly like the rest of my family. We're complete. It's like Dr. Seuss. I mean, we really just look exactly the same, but I'm just different in that way. And I thrived in worlds that respected my alternative ways of thinking. And to their credit, and again to the credit of the 70s, my family totally respected that too. And they really gave me space. But I was, my mom, God, I'm not a parent. My mom put this thing on my ceiling, taped something to my ceiling that I wake up and see in the morning that says, "Where are your shoes?" So I was lucky. I think probably, Joe, I was the luckiest person out there, because I really saw how certain systems were really functioning for people that didn't function for me. So I was really interested in how we kind of personally, subjectively get things to function. But I was minimally shamed about it. I was shamed. You don't grow up in a town like I did and not get sort of shamed for being a little bit differently, but not so much that I couldn't get on with my life with, a little bit of therapy. So that's probably where it comes from.
When she's older, I'm going to tell my youngest daughter that you're the one responsible for the sign on top of her bed that says, "Where are your Crocs?" Now,
unfortunately, you have to keep on putting designs on it because she'll desensitize. Just speaking from experience.
Exactly. No, but that's interesting to me, that sort of temperament that you have, and something that I'm always interested in. When you describe a temperament like that, it's very useful as an artist and a creative person. But have you had to do work as an adult in the personal realm to not let that sort of kind of radical concern or radical responsibility not enter like an infinite regression where you're holding yourself responsible for things that are unreasonable to hold yourself responsible for?
Yeah, well, it's a meditation, Joe.
Yeah.
I mean, it's there are a few things that really created very helpful pasture, fence posts for me to sort of rein in things that could get out of control. And like, I come into this place where I go to this very artsy school, and everyone's like, you want to staple toast to the wall, that's called art. Like, they were turning everything upside down. I remember one kid, just the first week I was there, he went to this alternative school, prep school, and he came and he would climb the stairs from the outside and then like climb in over the banister. Like, he was always sort of looking at the negative space around things and turning stuff upside down. And it was a good place for me, except that it just kept on going and going into the place where sort of reality would sort of dissipate and disassociate, and I started to lose my mind, and somebody broke my heart, and there was kind of no person there to be like, well, F that, get out of, I'm doing my thing. Like, nothing was there. So I went, so one of the fence posts was going to a therapist who said, and worked with a lot of people from my college, it turns out, and she said, okay, politics, you turn things upside down, you reverse the hierarchy, you look at the person at the bottom and you care about them, and you look at the system and the way that it can serve. That's great. The environment, what you do, you turn things upside down and you say, what is, instead of how much can I get for how little, you say, where does it come from? Do I really need it? Where is it going? I totally get that. Turning it upside down, art, turning things upside down. Your reality, you can't turn it upside down. You have to make some decisions about who you are and what you believe in. And I was like, but that's fascist. She's like, okay, call it what you're going to call it. But you will kill yourself if you don't make some decisions. And then I started to have these dreams that had these uncanny messages in them that she would help me, and she was awesome, and sort of help me turn upside down. I mean, turn right side up to sort of recognize myself. But that idea that, yes, we live in a very relative world, and it's really great to let your imagination go and go and go. It's also great to plant yourself. That was very helpful. And, there's a certain exhaustion that comes from taking a class called The Human Prospect when you're 20, and hearing about this thing called global warming, and watching the advent of SUVs and going, oh, no, we can't. What are you doing here? And watching, liberal, prosperous people, buying bigger and bigger houses. And you're like, but you're the ones who are supposed to be like, homesteading and farmsteading. Why did you, there's something really exhausting about seeing that. And I think 10 years in, I started to feel less responsible and less panicked, because it was a distraction, and get more into sort of, well, what can I do to be part of this? And some of that requires, I'm in this space right now about how much do I fly, and there's going to be stuff that I'm going to fly for, and it's sort of, I'm looking at the big picture. I'm going to fly because I believe in my career, I believe in the books that I've written, and I believe in being out there in the world with them, and the power of music and the power of the other stuff that I've done. And I hope that I can offset it, but I think about it all the time still. But your question is good. I don't think I panic about it anymore, and it doesn't drag me down. I really wish I had done more shopping and had more matching outfits at the advent of my career. There's so many secondhand dresses that I was wearing that didn't quite fit that my friends gave me because I was so worried about, my footprint.
Getting better at your instrument is an essential part of being a songwriter. When you play better guitar, you write better songs. It's that simple. How do you do that, though? Sure, you could get lessons from the neighbor who majored in postmodern gypsy jazz at Dartmouth, but that'll cost you an arm and a leg. Or you could pull up YouTube and pay nothing at all, but then you'll end up sifting through videos of nerds unironically weeping as they create the reverb from Little Wing through what seems to be 16 different effects pedals on their pedal board. So what's the sweet spot in between? Peghead Nation, the online home for American roots music. They feature curated video workshops with world-class instructors on guitar, mandolin, banjo, fiddle, upright bass, dobro, and ukulele. They have levels of instruction that meet the needs of both scrappy upstarts and grizzled veterans. And most importantly of all, it comes in at a low monthly subscription that actual strapped-for-cash songwriters can easily afford. To start taking classes yourself, head on over to pegheadnation.com to check out their 50 available courses. Enter the promo code TWS to get your first month free. You can also send a gift subscription to the songwriter in your life or the player in your band who needs a not-so-subtle hint about their playing prowess. Peghead Nation. When you play better guitar, you write better songs. It's that simple. One of the nice things about talking to an artist like Dar, who has so much experience, is her perspective on all the different eras of her career. She can evaluate and reminisce on each one with the distance of an observer. That kind of objectivity isn't inevitable, though. It is possible to never move on, never grow up, mature, let go, and it takes bravery as an artist and as a person to change, and to look back without bitterness at who you used to be. There's a wonderful poem by the poet Tom Slay that gets to that point. It's entitled Proof of Poetry. I wanted first to end up as a drunk in the gutter, and in my 20s, I almost ended up there. And then, as an alternative to vodka, to live alone like a hermit philosopher and court the extreme poverty that I suspected lay in store for me anyway. And then there were the years in which I needed very badly to take refuge in mediocrity. Years like blunt scissors cutting out careful squares. And that was the worst, the very worst. You could say that always my life was like a patchwork quilt, always ripped apart. My life like scraps stitched together in a dream in which animals and people, plants, chimeras, stars, even minerals were in a preordained harmony. A dream forgotten because it has to be forgotten, but that I looked for desperately, but only sporadically found in fragments. A hand lifted to strike or caress, or simply lifted for some unknown reason. And in memory, too, some specific pain, sensation of cold or warmth. I loved that harmony in all its stages of passion, the voices still talking inside me. But then, instead of harmony, there was nothing but rags scattered on the ground. And maybe that's all it means to be a poet. I want to get like a little bit into the nuts and bolts of your career, because it's kind of unlikely. Like, how do you go from someone hearing that their theater company is defunct at a dinner table to, becoming like a nationally known singer-songwriter for many decades. So you broke into that scene in Boston. When did you get kind of your first break from Boston onto the more national stage? How did things sort of start getting going for you?
There was a great, as somebody said, you could go to an open mic every night. There was a great open mic scene. And then there were there were tip jar gigs. So like my roommate had a fellow waitress, who had just left her job, who was going to go full time, who said I could open for her, so I did that. And her name was Patty Griffin. And there were opening slots for national acts that you could be seen and at an open mic and pulled out to open for and things like that. So there was not only sort of a fertile open mic scene where you could figure out who you were and who your musical community was. There was also a sort of a rung by rung tip jar gig, opening slot, gigs with your friends, play at a protest, thing too, where you would get your name out there. And then there were all the Kinkos and the places around there where you could make your little flyers and mailers and put together your mailing list, and other people knew how to do that. Jim Infantino was my boyfriend at the time, and he helped me so much to kind of feel that out. So when people say, I want to start out, what do? I say, move to a place where there is a scene, where there are open mics, where there are other musicians, where you can encourage each other, and where you can, improve within a community that sees the improvement and also doesn't excoriate, the need for improvement. So, so that's what happened to me. I was steeped in that world, and then Jim and I went out on the road. I mean, we didn't make any money, but we were gone for about a month, and we, slept on people's couches, and we played at open mics and played tip jar gigs and little gigs. And it was just a huge adventure. And then I came home and we broke up. I moved to Northampton, and that's where I just had space to, it was cheap, and I had a bunch of jobs. And I think one of the big breakthroughs came because a radio station was doing a fundraiser, and I sang a song that they put on a CD. Mm-hmm. And I was in the midst of recording my first CD. I'd done 2 cassettes. And I became like a little sensation where I was in Northampton because they played it on the Homegrown show on WRSI in Northampton. I think that was kind of, as I think you're probably hearing, a lot of what I did was formed sociologically. Sort of there was a context. So when you did something, you didn't have to go, up to the 18th floor of Sony Music. You grew. I created what was called an audience-based career.
Yes. Is that something that you still think is available to people today?
I think the lack of CDs is a profound. Well, I will say CDs, that little plastic disc, which is, not great for the environment, are really made the difference in a lot of ways for a lot of us. One, you could get a song on a fundraising compilation for a left of the 92, radio station, mm-hmm. For a public radio station, or you could be on the Hear Music CD that they played at Starbucks, and if you like Nora Jones, maybe you're going to like Dar Williams kind of thing. Those are not with us anymore. You can't, I'm sure this was the same for, I'm guessing, you get paid. I can't do a thing where I would get paid $25 or get the tip jar in Albany, New York, sell 5 CDs for a total of $75 and, get to the next gig on the $75, not the $25 from the tip jar. Like, that's not the model, and that's not part of the model anymore. So the sort of early low overhead self-sustaining career thing isn't happening anymore. That's another thing that is missing with these CDs, not these actual products not being there. So that's to say, I don't know. There is less available in terms of that kind of rung by rung climb than there was when I was doing it.
It's funny. In some ways, if you weren't in music, you would say to yourself, well, why does this artifact of technology actually matter here? Like what you're talking about, the CD, because surely, streaming's here, that pays, da-da-da-da-da. You're making a very instructive point, though, because there is something about having something physical to sell people at a show, which, by the way, even 25 years ago, you could sell the things for $15 a piece, which is still what you'd sell them for now. Obviously, $15 isn't worth the same amount now. So I really don't know. I caught the tail end of what you're talking about. I started about 15 years ago. I caught the tail end of that. I could still fill up the gas tank with CD money. I really don't know, the idea of like, well, I got on a playlist on Spotify, so in 4 months, CD Baby is going to send me $700. You know what I mean? Like that, great, awesome. That doesn't help me get from Northampton to Rochester today. You know what I mean?
There's that, and then there's just, it's interesting. It's almost like the CDs were also kind of a bit of a, well, I called it like a stock. It's like owning a single stock, and the record companies would listen to those sign, would see who was buying what stock, and they'd say, oh, and they would do that thing that we all have heard, who's Tracy Chapman? Get me Tracy Chapman. Get me somebody who sounds like Tracy Chapman. Who's Tracy Chapman? That sort of, and that sort of cycle. As awful as that sounds, at least you got to be Tracy Chapman for a while, and now you still do, because they would create this sort of platform of everybody has to listen to this, everybody, and we're going to put it everywhere, and we're going to make everyone aware of it. So that whole, we're going to buy stock in this, this band called REM, in this, these really wonderful, self-identified, fabulous lesbians called the Indigo Girls. We're going to buy this stock, and the record company's going, oh, okay. I call capitalism a nose. It just smells money. Right. That whole machinery of, people buying that quote unquote stock, that share of stock, and sharing it with all of their people on the dorm, and saying, damn it, you scratched it, and all that, all of that kind of campfiring around that disc. Had many levels of helping to build an artist's career based on who was buying that piece of plastic. And the record companies say that they still are interested in that, but it's not as cut and dry. The stock is a little more fluid in terms of, what we heard is that the streaming companies came along and said, we'll give you a piece of what these people are doing, and the record companies were like, you will never monetize that, and the streaming entities said, well, why don't we give you an advance of X million dollars. And some people believe that the people who are on Spotify or the streaming entities, how they rank is specifically and mathematically quantified, and the record companies give you a piece exactly proportionate. And some people think it's really random and weird. So things got murkier and muddier, and I think we're starting to see more money from the streaming entities now. So I don't really want to complain insofar as it's so much better than it was, but yes, it's different. And it's easier to fudge, I think, for the people who might be paying you. It's getting more transparent. But it's also, and then there's just a lot of ways that it's different. There's people say that there's just a lot of music out there. And one music critic said, there's just too much out there. And I thought, that is something a critic would say. An artist would never say there's too much music out there. That's the problem. Right. It's not that. The fact that a lot of people are out there making music and it's hard to keep track of it all, I think that's a red herring.
I would agree. I would obviously agree. I think that it is interesting. You see bands that are younger bands that are getting started now who maybe have had some success with a streaming platform, like via playlists or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I'll talk to them. They'll come open for me at a show somewhere and they say, hey, man, we got picked up on a playlist. We got 700,000 monthly listeners. I'm like, that's great, man. That's a whole hell of a lot more than I got. So good for you. I hope the money's, awesome. And they're like, no. Our problem is we're so disconnected from these people that actually listen to the music. So it's nice to have this revenue, but it's like nothing's free, man. You know what I mean? And Spotify or whoever ain't opening up that black box to say, hey, band from Northampton that has 700,000 monthly listeners, here's how you can get in touch with all those listeners. Here's how they can go from our mailing list to your mailing list. Here's how you can market to them. Like, they're very, very disconnected in a way that we're talking about a music business from 20 years ago that was more embodied. There was a more kind of direct connection between you, like a physical connection between you and the people who are listening to your tunes.
Well, that's what I I did a 20th anniversary tour of Mortal City, which was my second album, and it did pretty well. So that was the one that, we did 20 of my first one, The Honesty Room, and then the second one's called Mortal City. And the way people talk to me, this is kind of meta, but the way people talk to me about how they listened to my music and the way they kind of went back to that self to show up for that 20th anniversary concert felt different. And I don't even want to over-explain it. It just felt different than it does now. And people still come and they listen to my CDs in the car with their kids, and I'm like, God bless you. They're holding on to it. And people hear me on playlists, and that's how they hear. But, there's all that. But the way people sort of gathered around an album, I remember somebody bringing Graceland to us, at the French house at college where I lived. I'm a terrible French speaker, but, it was like the way it circulated through the house, the way we talked about it, the way we're, walking around on the cold linoleum floor of the kitchen talking about these songs and thinking about these songs, and the way it kind of traveled through our French community was different than it is right now. And yet, the new Kendrick Lamar album is, circulating in my friends' community right now, and people are talking about it and thinking about it, and so I don't want to be too cynical about it, but it just seemed like people gathered, as you say, it was a more embodied phenomenon.
Yes. And sometimes I do have to remind myself it's, because I play music that's on the folkier end, that's on the more singer-songwriter end. And it's like, you know what, man? Like, maybe remember that you're consciously choosing to play a music that, I think anachronistic is too strong of a word, but it's certainly not in the center of the cultural zeitgeist right now. So maybe remember that, you know what I mean? And that's a choice that you made there. And, right. Right. Don't expect it to be, 1965 at Cafe Wah. That's not how things work,
No. And that's, that moment in time is, I taught a lot about the 60s for this college course. I taught about, sort of music and movements. And it's actually something that would be great if we could get back to a little bit. And it actually, for all that, you had the magic of the music that we still listen to from the 60s, and you did have an industry beneath it, kind of sometimes invisibly guiding that forward. You also had, paradoxically, a very participatory community of people playing those songs for each other and writing their own songs and feeling like they were part of it, feeling sort of musically connected to it, and having that personal slurry of making music, listening to music, having politics, participating in politics. If you are part of a musical group that has the vulnerability and the strength of playing music together and singing music together, and you have both the vibrational connection and also the way that you have allowed yourself to be vulnerable, because making music is a soft thing, Those are people who, if they call you up and say, we're going to go to a protest, you're going to go with them. They're your friends. You're going to sing in the car, and you're going to jump in, and 8 people are going to be in a Volkswagen Beetle, and you're going to do it. There's a kind of a way that people participated in culture, politics, and each other's lives. that kind of was a fantastic slurry of participation in the 60s. And people, I think it gave people a sense that their opinions and thoughts mattered and their creativity mattered. And I think that's something. I wrote a book called What I Found in 1,000 Towns about how towns kind of build themselves, and participatory art and boostering the art that comes through the town is something that creates a collective sense of expression and self-actualization that helps towns go forward. So I'm like, I think we got to get back to the 60s. But yes, you're right. It was a very different time. And the music, the way that stories played into those communities, you know, you and I both believe that those stories are just as important now. They really, music is how things get in to us and into our cultures. Music is how it gets in. And it's, you know, I hope that we get back to a place where music is how stuff gets in. And there are aspects of that, like Kendrick Lamar, or, I mean, you know, there is songwriting that is still getting in there and affecting the wheel of culture and history.
Well, yeah, I think you're exactly right. That's the only way that it gets in. And I think that with the rise of social media, I think a big mistake that a lot of artists make is they think that they can just make those points via the medium of social media. And it's like, yeah, you can make those points, but that's just not a medium for them to enter into anybody's heart. It just absolutely isn't. It's not. People don't like being talked at. People don't like being proselytized to when they know that it's happening. And I'm not saying that you need to have like some hidden ulterior agenda to your music to get it into people, but there's almost like people accept when they're listening to music that could be happening, that you know, they could be listening to something that they wouldn't normally be open to in regular conversation because they're participating in sort of a sacred, transcendent medium of some kind. And so, yeah, to your point, I do hope that we can get back to that, because I don't think that there's another way to communicate heart to heart. I just don't think that, you know, some throwaway post on Facebook, even if it was making the same exact point as a beautiful song, there's no way that it's getting into somebody's heart. That's just not how it works.
Yeah, it's almost like the music is kind of the it's what makes the surface permeable. And
that's a great metaphor.
Yeah. So, and we've seen that. You and I have seen the power of that, and both in the music I've heard and in the music I've seen being received that I create on a stage, or that I see my friends creating on a stage. The power is eternal.
I love that idea of permeating the surface. What you're talking about is a portal there, and a portal is magic, right? So before the portal even appears, you don't even suppose it's possible that something could exist that you could walk through to take you somewhere else. And then it appears, and then you walk through it and you are somewhere else. And that is, in a very meaningful way, when music affects us very deeply, that is what happens.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes. And it stays with us, and it's also something that is a touchstone for memory. And I think if you're steeped in a certain kind of music, and then you come to a place in your life where, as they say, the road is no longer straight, you have that touchstone, of your values about, you're not as conned by the status quo of, as I said before, how much can I get for how little? There's, I'm haunted by that bumper sticker on the station wagon in 1973 that says, "Live simply so that others may simply live." I'm always thinking of that. So, but there's a lot of music around that sort of planted it in, that created a paradigm, that created the schemata mm-hmm. of what that could look like and what that could feel like, the romance of it. When I would teach, I would say, look at all the stuff that's happening in the early 60s. Why do you think I put in this bagel shop and this unfinished furniture shop in this sort of map of Greenwich Village? Why am I highlighting that? And they're like, because it's cheap. I said, yeah, it was cheap, and there were lots of ways to participate in and listen to music. And they put a lot of different music next to each other. And what else do you think was really there with all of these people making music and being in each other's houses late at night, sitting on the couch? And they're like, and I was like, sex. And I said, but you know what? More powerful than sex, friendship. Yeah. So much friendship.
Yes.
And friendship is such a, different kinds of friendships, different kinds of grouping. Music helps to create certain kinds of friendship bonds that I think are, what makes the world go round. So that's another way that music permeates and then helps us create bonds, because, it's like permeation or the portal, once you're in there and you see people around you who have had that experience, that's a bond.
Yes. Well, and you use the word romance there, and obviously romance goes, far beyond just sex. And I think that there's a way, you're talking to younger students about this idea of romance. Like, there is something very romantic to be able to tell young people who are considering a life in the arts of, like, guess what? You're going to go into this. You're not going to make any money. There's going to be no guarantees. You're going to be shopping at the thrift store for your couch or whatever it is. So there's that. But on the other hand, we're all going to die one day, right? Mm-hmm. So you have this very limited amount of time. So what the hell are you going to do, right? And there is sort of like an esprit de corps. There is sort of a kind of romance in just saying, oh, to hell with it. But let's go do this crazy thing.
Well, there's got to be, I would say what's nice is, I'm for the hybrid model. And maybe this is because, I think I've always believed this, actually. There's something that I say to students. It's true. It's like the romance of being on the road and the romance of, having this bag of food that you have to kind of make sure. Somebody taught me, like, if you've got food in the car, just put it all in one place. You just don't want to discover it. just keep like this constant consolidation, so and where it is, and you don't find old banana peels. But there's something about sort of that and the scrappiness and the adventures you have sleeping on your friends' couches and floors and stuff. It's very meaningful, and it's real. That romance is real, and it's worth having, and it's worth being a part of. And I played the song "You're Aging Well" for somebody, and she asked me to write out all the lyrics for her. And this was, I was just playing one song because my friend was playing her set at a cafe, and I just sang that one song, and somebody said, those moments when what you do connect are very powerful. So the romance is very good and strong. But speaking specifically to the sort of we're going to die someday, so let's throw it all out into the wind, I, as it were, what I say to college students is there are a bunch of numbers, and they are toxic. Your weight, your age, your Billboard chart numbers, how many audience members are there, and of course now all the likes and all the social media clicks stuff. But the one number that's really important to think about is money. And I watch all these kids who have been told, do what you love and the money will come. Gasp.
Right.
But that was the advice I got in college. I went to the career place and I said, I want to be a writer. And the career counselor, bless her, said, great, as opposed to, oh, God, another Wesleyan writer. She said, great. Don't try to make your money by writing right away. You'll get discouraged. And what I recommend is that you house sit, that you live as cheaply as possible, that you get as mindless a job as you can find, and do all those things so that you feel some stability so that you can write, as opposed to saying, I will starve until I sell my novel. And I watch, because there's something in capitalism that's like, it's got to monetize right away or else you're a failure. And no one, or you should love it so much that you live on it and it's your bread. And you don't actually need actual nutrition or shelter. Like, both of those are really weird. They've got a capitalistic metallic tang to them that's not really realistic. So when I come along, Little Miss Folk Singer, idealist, wore her friend's hand-me-downs for 30 years, and say that, they're like, okay, I'll listen to you. And what I say is, figure out what your known expenses are, what your projected expenses are, and then what you would have left over, and that's what you have to live on every day, whether that's $10 or $50. Mm-hmm. And that can be, you can live on $30,000 a year or $20,000 a year, but it's got to look, you got to figure out what that's going to look like and if that's okay with you. If you're okay with a car that breaks down in the middle of the highway at 2:00 in the morning, then that's great, but that might happen. Or a career where you just get by on public transportation, great, work it. But that decide what you're willing to live with so that you can keep the romance,
Yes.
because the romance is worth it.
It is. Thank you so much for being on the Working Songwriter Podcast. It's been a real honor to host you here, and I'm very appreciative. Thank you so much, Dar Williams.
Thank you.
This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Dar Williams is offering in-person songwriting retreats at the Guest House in Chester, Connecticut, June 20th to 24th and August 1st through 5th. Head to darwilliams.com for details. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.